Good evening. Welcome to the Darkstream. I am VoxDay, voxday.blogspot.com, and Infogalactic News. Big day for Britain today. Brexit is go, and that's related to the trend that I wanted to talk about. What we're seeing across Europe. What we're seeing across Europe is the rise of nationalism. We're seeing the end of a 200-year trend that began with, I think you can probably date it back to around 1815 or so. It's as useful a point as any when we began to, with the Italian Risorgimento, when you began to see the globalists, the first inkling of the globalists trying to form the smaller kingdoms, smaller principalities into these large nations, which they are now attempting to meld together into these giant supernatural states. But what we're seeing everywhere is fierce opposition to that. It's not just opposition to that, but it's very clear that the nations themselves don't want any part of it. In Scotland, for example, the vote was the first independence vote, the first where they wanted to break up this long-lasting union with England. If only Scottish people had voted, it would have passed. The reason that it failed was because English and Welsh and Irish residents in Scotland voted against it. Now, why were they permitted to vote? They shouldn't have any say in Scottish independence. I hope that if Nicola Sturgeon is successful in holding another referendum, only Scottish people, only Scottish nationals resident in Scotland are permitted to vote, because they're the only people whose opinion matters. I think it was Mark Levine who, frankly, surprised me, because apparently on the Rush Limbaugh show, either yesterday or today, he made a very sarcastic reference to 7.6 billion Americans. And what he's mocking there is the idea that anyone can be American. He's mocking the idea that you can be born American in Portugal, that you can be born American in Nigeria, that you can be born American in Mexico. You can't be. There's no such thing as a hyphenated American. If it's hyphenated, it's not American. It's kind of interesting. I saw the comment there about Levine being a snake. Now, I don't know that much about him. I've never, frankly, paid that much attention to him. But the interesting thing is that the fact that somebody who's generally a little bit more inclined to go with the civic nationalism, to go with the whole approach that that borders don't matter, that nations are conceptual and propositions and so forth. The fact that he is now moving towards the alt-right is very interesting. It's a sign of the times. It's a sign that the trends have changed. And what we're seeing, this is all related to socionomics. I don't know if you've ever read any of this stuff. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for investing, but Robert Prechter's got some very interesting stuff. Pioneering studies in socionomics and the wave principle. He calls it Socionomics, the science of history and social prediction. And he called this. He called this trend that socionomics is actually quite good when it comes to predicting the larger trends. It's not so good when they try to apply it to the markets, in my experience. But in terms of the larger trend, it's very good. And it is the closest thing to Harry Seldon that we have. It's the closest thing to psychohistory that we have. And which is kind of interesting because I'm editing The Corroding Empire right now, which is a bit of a take on Asimov's Foundation, which of course is where psychohistory was introduced. But the thing that is interesting about it is that we are at just past the peak of one of the longest waves of social optimism in history. And so, for 200 years, things have generally been good generally been positive from a social mood perspective. Now, obviously, there have been some very bad times, especially with the two world wars. But if you look at the overall trend, it's been uniformly up. Now, that's a good point. Prechter published a book in 2000, I think it was called like at the crest of the wave or something like that. And he was basically talking about the idea that this wave of global social optimism had peaked around 2000. And the thing is, at the time, people were maybe tying that a little bit too much to things like the idea of things like Y2K and whatever. But if you look at what happened, it actually does look like that the peak was around that time. Well, globalism, it's not that social mood rose at the same time as globalism. Globalism is a consequence of social mood. The more positive the social mood, the more that we are convinced that everyone is good and everyone's the same and we can all get along and that sort of thing. And so, but those days are clearly past. The trend is now downward. The trend is now negative. The social mood, now obviously the social mood is not very negative. Most people are still way too optimistic and positive about the idea that we can all live together and so forth, and everyone's the same and that sort of thing. Well, we all know it's not true. But at the same point, we're still not, we're not at the point yet where people are shooting at people just because they look different. At the crest of the tidal wave. There we go. So, so we have a long, long way to go before it reaches that point. But it is interesting living over here in Europe, though, because I was out one day and for a walk, and I ran into a woman from the neighborhood. She was just sort of sitting out on her front stoop, like she liked to do. And she was drinking a glass of wine. She said, would you like a glass of wine? I said, sure. So I sat down next to her. We were just chatting a bit. And she said, well, is it difficult for you being stranieri? And, which means strangers. That's how they refer to foreigners in Italian. And I said, no. People are very nice. Everybody's great. Whatever. And she said, yes, but, you will never be one of them. I said, well, yeah, that's true. I said, but, for us, the big change was when we went from being, the Americani, the Americans, to when they would refer to us. When people would talk about us, they would say, the Americani, the Americans. After a certain point of time, it was fairly obvious when it happened, we would hear references to Nostri Americani, our Americans. And so, that was the point at which we knew that we had been accepted. But the distinction was still there. Yeah, I certainly don't. My American accent is very strong. And I mean, it was really, it was touching. Not so much that, but what was even more impressive to me was when in late November 2001, we got a knock on the door, and it was the police. And you're thinking, okay, what did I do? Is our papers in order? What's going on? And the policeman said, are you going back to the States for Christmas this year? And I said, yes, we are. I can show you the, I was thinking it had something to do with the residence or whatever, so I can show you the tickets and so forth. And he said, oh, no. We had a meeting at the town council, and we don't want you to go back to the States this year. And I said, okay, why not? Are we being imprisoned in the country? And they said, no, as you may know, it's very dangerous there. They are flying planes into buildings. I said, you're talking about 9/11, New York City, right? He said, yes, it's very bad, very dangerous. And I said, I had to literally show him on a map how far we were going to be from New York and how nothing had happened where we were going, and that we were pretty confident everything would be okay before he would agree to let us go back, because they wanted us to stay there where we would be safe. And so they were really looking out for us. It was very it was very welcoming. But again, that didn't mean that we were them. We might be their pet Americans, but we were not. But there's never any confusion that we were one of them per se. Did we ever do anything to merit this? Not at that point in time. We hadn't. Honestly, I think they were seriously thinking about building a statue to me when I led the little local kids team, and we beat the two professional clubs who have kids teams who had always won for years. I mean, in fact, when we beat, for 2 years we were undefeated. I'd introduced some very unorthodox tactics. And I remember the first time we beat the big club, the big local professional club, the father of one of my little defenders was crying. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, they always beat my father, and they always beat me, but now my son has defeated them. So that was a good feeling. Plus, the best part about it was the trophy was huge. I mean, it was like 5 feet tall. And since I was the manager, the team decided that I should get to keep it at the house. You have seldom seen an unhappier woman than when we retained this trophy. We beat the 2 pro teams again, retained the trophy. I brought it back to the house. She was so excited to get that monstrosity out of the living room. So anyhow, that was pretty funny. So yeah, after my team won these things, I was actually the coach and player for the next village over, and so the village, our village, tried to get me to leave my club and come and coach for their team. So that was kind of funny. But anyhow, the point that I was going to make is that I'm sitting there next to this woman, and she says, but it doesn't matter how long you're here, you'll never be one of the village. And I said, well, are you not one of the village? No, we've lived here for 30 years, but we are still not one of them. I said, oh, okay. I said, well, where did you come from? Did you come from, she didn't sound like she came from like Calabria or a place where they speak very differently. So, but I was assuming she was talking about, coming from some sort of province on the other end of the country or something. She says, here, and literally names the not just the next town over. I mean, I could literally, we were near the border of that neighboring village. I could literally have punted a football and crossed the border. So merely the fact that she had moved from one town to the neighboring town, she was, in a sense, stranieri, like me, an American. Right? You know, I mean, this, to an American mind, this is very foreign. You know, we're used to, and it is because there are, the roots are so deep that you can literally tell in some cases what village somebody comes from by their face, because they all look a little bit alike. You know, like, for example, in my town, the 10 of the 11 starters for the soccer team, plus the coach, were all named Bernasconi. You know, Bernasconi is basically the family that dominated that town. You know, they're all extended cousins and uncles and so forth, and that's where you get the high trust social cohesion that you need for Western civilization. You know, it needs to be. It's not just enough to have that genetic cohesion. It has to be the right genetics. You're not going to get that if you have a bunch of, you know, it's not going to be the same if you have a bunch of Germans, if you have a bunch of Italians, if you have a bunch of Arabs. You know, it's, well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the, there's actually some theory. Francis Fukuyama likes to write about the idea that the reason that Europe was able to move forward was because of an advance intellectually, was because of the church's ban on cousin marriage. And so Italy didn't have too much until fairly recently. But you still don't, you know, they have a lot of refugees and asylum seekers, but it's not integrated at all. When we went to Rome with some friends from Minnesota 2 years ago, I think it was, my friend's wife commented that she was surprised that they saw far more Muslims in Minneapolis than they did in Rome. Now, on the other hand, we did turn the corner once and run to this huge demonstration of, I think it was like Sri Lankans who were protesting something or other. So, you know, they definitely have immigrant issues, but it's not the same. So, yeah, and the panhandling is completely out of control. I don't talk about my personal business in public, and I think it would be incredibly stupid for anyone who's any sort of public figure to do so. So I don't answer questions like that, and I don't answer questions about my family. The Thought Sound Foundation, it's okay. Anyhow, but let's get back to the trend thing. So the trend thing, look what's going on. Geert Wilders, you know, comported himself. He's not backing down. You know, he is coming out firing hard against what we would probably consider the Cuckservative right in Holland. You know, I think that, you know, for all the fact that the Party of Freedom has declined in the polls a bit. I mean, we all know what the polls are worth. It will not be a surprise if Wilders performs better than anticipated. It's still probably not going to allow him to completely control Parliament, but I think it's going to send a strong message. We've got in the U.S., I think it was Representative Steve King who basically came out with what is essentially an alt-right position, a very strong statement about the fact that if you want to keep your civilization, your women have to have babies. If other people come in and have babies for you, then you're not going to keep your civilization. You're going to have their civilization, or what passes for one. And so, and these things are important. It's very important not to back down. You know, the whole idea, they depend on people shutting up and silencing themselves and being quiet so that they can convince everybody else that nobody thinks that way. And that's why it's so important to speak out, and it's so important to support those who do speak out. I was delighted to see King refuse to back down, because that's key. We've seen for 30 years, you know, we've seen people say stuff, get criticized, and immediately back down. You can't do that. You cannot do that. No, the rise of mechanization does not make babies less important. And so, you know, I was talking, Brittany Pettibone and Tara, her co-host, were interviewing me, and I think I may have mentioned this last night when they said, what can we do? What should we be doing? You know, and they're both young women in their 20s. I said, get married and have children. It's the single most important thing that any woman can do. Having children and raising and supporting them is the single most important thing that any man can do. You know, I mean, we need to plant the acorns so that the trees in whose shade we will not sit will grow. And, you know, this is totally contradictory to the modern spirit of, who gives a damn, do whatever you want to do. Yes, men do have to avoid being too selective and picky, you know. Stop worrying about trying to find a swimsuit model who can, you know, do sexual gymnastics and pyrotechnics. You know, I mean, those things are nice, but it's not going to maintain, you know, it's that sort of stuff is totally irrelevant with regards to maintaining your civilization. You know, I realize that's not necessarily the most, you know, but here's the thing. You don't need to find a woman who agrees with you completely, because women tend to follow the excuse me. Sorry about that. Women tend to follow the intellectual and political lead of their husbands as long as their husbands are forthright and firm about it. You know, the main reason I have 3 burn unit t-shirts. That's hilarious. That's great. You know, the most, what was I going to say? Yeah, in general, if you are a sufficiently intellectually strong man, your wife is usually going to not follow you, but she's usually going to gravitate somewhat towards your perspective and your positions. I mean, there's a reason why the left is so keen on divorce and is so keen on splitting up men and women. It's because one of the biggest single indicators of how a woman is going to vote over a certain age is whether she's married or not. You know, married women tend to vote in the interests of their family. So they tend to vote much more traditional, much more conservative, much more alt-right. You know, some of the most powerful voices in the alt-right are married women, like Wife with a Purpose, like Space Bunny. You know, these are, Ann Coulter is probably the most significant alt-right figure in the country. She's more important than me. She's more important than Milo. She's vastly more important than Mike Cernovich or Richard Spencer, and any of them would readily admit it. And so, Lauren Southern's good, but I'd love to see her focusing on some of the traditional elements too, and basically coming out and telling other young women, hey, I want to get married and I want to have kids because I think it's important. You want to see them do it. I think Wife with a Purpose has like 5, and so, but that's the thing. Stay-at-home moms are the, they're the aircraft carriers of the traditional right. They are the most important weapons that we have, and of course that is why the stay-at-home mom are so under attack. It's why they're so demonized and so forth. Anne is not properly. Actually, I would say Anne actually is more alt-right than Trump is. I mean, she's not a proper civic nationalist. There's a column that I wrote some years ago. You guys might want to look it up, especially some of you women. It's called The Mother's War, and I wrote it for Mother's Day. And it, obviously, being a theorist of game, I'm somewhat known as not being terribly positive about women. But a lot of that is, of course, because I directly confront feminists and that sort of thing. And so, what I wanted to do is, when I wrote that, I wanted to make sure that women, traditional women, wives and mothers, understood that even someone like me, who, doesn't tend to say a lot of nice things about women and so forth, I wanted to show that even someone like me recognizes how important and how vital their sacrifices are, how important their purpose is. I said, the world, the human race does not need another doctor, another computer programmer, somebody else working in STEM. But if women do not marry and have children, society will die, civilization will die, the human race will die. That is the only thing that a woman absolutely has to do. And it is absolutely vital that we men support them in that, help them do that. Don't worry about things like, oh, can we afford another kid and that sort of thing. If your wife is willing to do it, that's God's way of telling you, go ahead and do it. I think it's always funny, when you've got multiple kids, maybe you only wanted 2, maybe you only wanted 3 or whatever. But the funny thing is that once you have another kid and they become part of the family, then you can't imagine not having them. And I used to be. It's fairly well known. I used to be a pretty hardcore hedonist, and I used to drive a Porsche. I used to only wear Armani suits and Ungaro ties, and that kind of stuff was important to me. Now, I couldn't care less. I don't care if I'm driving a sports car or a minivan. I'm perfectly happy. I'm perfectly happy wearing crypto fashion t-shirts instead of Armani suits. My life is vastly more rewarding. It's richer and it's deeper in experience than hanging out at nightclubs, going on stage, driving a Porsche, and you know, wearing nice Italian suits. Don't get me wrong. On when I wear a suit now, I wear a very nice Italian custom-made suit. So, you know, I know the right people now. But the thing is that it's important for those of you who don't have kids yet, who aren't married yet, to understand that yes, it is a change, but it's a change for the better. And it doesn't mean that it's painless. It doesn't mean that there aren't risks. You know, but it is still a necessary sacrifice that you need to make for yourself, for your society, for your civilization, and for your race. So, anyhow, that's my completely random, not really on topic Darkstream for tonight. In answer to the question about this shirt, this is a burn unit shirt. The burn unit are the people who have signed up for monthly subscriptions to Infogalactic. They're the ones who are funding Infogalactic. And so this is our way of sort of saying thank you to them. We had this special shirt made. It sells for a reduced price, and it's only accessible to people who are signed up for that. So you know, if you can afford a subscription of $10 a month, and you support what we're doing with Infogalactic and Infogalactic News, you know, I heavily encourage you to join the burn unit. You know, if nothing else, it's a cool shirt. It's kind of funny. I get comments on the Infogalactic shirt when I wear that, but when I wear this, the people always ask me about it. Always. The other thing I should mention, I'm not really a hoodie guy, but the sweatshirts and the hoodies, because you can get a lot of the hoodies in regular sweatshirts, they are amazingly comfortable. I mean, they're literally the softest. Sweatshirt material I've ever felt. I got one of them. I got one of them for a family member. It came in a few days ago, and she has not taken it off in 3 days. I mean, she's not actually sleeping in it, but you know. And I said, you know, why do you like it so much? And I was like, it's just so soft. So, anyhow, just a pitch there for the crypto fashion hoodies and sweatshirts. They're pretty good. So, anyhow, thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you tomorrow.